So today we're going to be talking about some of the things that you can do when it feels like the entire world has turned against you. If you're like me, you've probably had the feeling that everyone has turned their back on you, or it feels like the universe is conspiring against you, or like there's this comic joke or this cosmic joke happening that just makes it impossible for you to be as happy as you want to be, or for you to achieve the level of success that you feel you deserve or that you want. Relationships are falling apart. You can't seem to get your needs met. No matter how hard you try, you just can't seem to get ahead. And it can feel like the world has turned against you. And that's a terrible way to feel. If you're like me, you may have even experienced depression, frustration, anger. You may have felt hopeless in your life and really challenged just to get up in the morning. I know I've been there. And I wanted to create a session around this idea that, well, what are some of the things that we can do when we feel this way? When we feel like there's no way up, when we feel like we just, no matter what we do, we can't seem to get out of our funk. And so I think it's important that we even understand what question we are trying to address. So when it feels like the world has turned against us, at our core, what does that feel like? What's really going on? We feel alone. We feel abandoned, maybe rejected. We may feel like we're not good enough. And that's not a nice way to feel. In order to feel successful and enough, you actually have to feel good enough. In order to feel like the world isn't against you and you don't have the world on your shoulders, you need to feel supported, which is really the opposite of how you feel when you feel like the world is against you. And so this idea that we feel alone has always intrigued me. And when you understand human nature at its core, you recognize that feeling alone and feeling rejected triggers survival, the survival mechanism. And when survival kicks in, we become very primitive. So unfortunately, the prefrontal lobe gets knocked offline, the creative center of the brain is knocked offline because now there's this priority that has switched on. We need to survive. The brain doesn't know the difference between emotional survival and I'm falling off a cliff survival. The brain doesn't know the difference between I really am, it's Armageddon, and I am literally the last human being standing because of some terrible, terrible nuclear explosion or some biochemical weapon that has taken place. And I really am the only person left on planet Earth, or I feel like I'm the only person on planet Earth. When we come from dysfunctional homes and we suffer abandonment trauma, when we have this attachment issue, when we weren't able to connect to our mothers and our fathers in a healthy way, then we walk around with this gaping hole inside of our hearts. And we don't realize that we are walking around constricted rather than feeling non-resistant and open. We don't have an open heart chakra. We are afraid of being hurt again. And so we walk around like our skin is raw, and we oftentimes become codependent, seek validation, acquiesce to the needs of others, and can be far too agreeable. Or we can swing to the other side of the road and we can become highly argumentative, super sensitive, and feel like everyone's out to get us all the time. Again, these are states of extreme, and what we're trying to do is fall somewhere in the middle, somewhere where we're able to recognize that, yeah, like today's a hard day, but you know what? Who knows what tomorrow will bring. But when you have all of this heaviness and you have all of this momentum around feeling like the world is out to get you, and you've carried this over from childhood, which is not your fault, it can feel like you're pushing this giant Mack truck up a steep hill, and you need to get it to the top of the hill in order to survive, and it just seems impossible. And so I wanted to give people an idea of, A, what's wrong? Like when I feel like the world is out to get me, what's happening? Remember that your thoughts affect your chemistry, and your beliefs affect your physiology. And our physiology affects our ability to think well. And the degree to which you think well is really reflective in how well you do day to day. In other words, if you think really well, if you have a wonderful way of organizing information, and if you're able to bypass emotions that are pulling you down and basically self-regulate, and you don't go down with the ship, and you don't become reactive to what you feel, in other words, behavior, because let's face it, you can feel like the world is against you, feel really, really awful about that, and then, indulge in not so healthy behaviors, which becomes this tremendous negative feedback loop, which doesn't end well. And so when I say we don't have to react to how we feel, that's what I mean. We can learn self-regulating behaviors, which is essentially the type of thing that I teach. And I teach this in my books, I teach this in my programs, I teach it in my posts, in my live streams. This is basically what I'm trying to help other people do because it saved my life. It changed my life, and it helped me create the life that I'm so happy that I get to live today. And I'm always trying to improve day to day because now I know I can. I know these secrets. And I think when you know something, you should share it. And that's what I'm trying to do today. I'm trying to help someone who feels like the world has turned against them to see where their power is, to give someone who feels this way hope. Well, maybe I can turn this around. Maybe there's a reason it feels so heavy. Maybe that's why other people can't understand my experience because it's happening in my head and in my veins and in my body and in my mind and thus in my reality. So it's my experience. Because sometimes when you feel like the world is out to get you and you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders and it feels like the whole world is turned against you, you try to reach out to people to explain how you feel and they're like, your life looks pretty good from where I'm standing, Lisa. They don't get it, which only makes us feel worse. So it's important that we understand that our experience, although subjective, is also very, very real. Because when you have an emotion, your body responds with a chemical that mirrors that emotion. Now, when we're having triggered thoughts, like we're feeling abandoned, then the prefrontal lobe gets knocked offline. The timekeeper of the brain gets knocked offline. We are literally childlike, and every person that we see has become a domineering authority figure that we need to be afraid of, and we are terrified to lose a connection to. So we become childlike, even though we can be 50, 60, 75, and 80 years old. We can have this traumatic experience to feeling abandoned. So I think just knowing that, wow, I feel like the world is out to get me and I'm not crazy. Or I feel like the world has turned against me and no wonder it feels so heavy because there is this onslaught of chemical processes that are occurring and behavioral processes and thought processes that are showing up as a result of feeling like the world has turned against me. Now, you can be someone who has felt abandoned and rejected in childhood, and you're carrying this over into adulthood. You might have a fear of abandonment, and sometimes people, it's not a black and white issue, but sometimes those of us who have a fear of abandonment, we tend to cling to people. So we cling, we end up in toxic relationships, and the whole time we're clinging, we're telling ourselves that we need this person, which is only activating survival, which is only going to activate this impending doom, which is only going to activate more cortisol, which is only going to activate and cause us to behave in a way that is counter to how we really want to feel, which is free and abundant and capable and resilient in a 3D world that there's very little that we can control outside of how we react to what's happening outside of us, right? But once we know that, okay, I feel this way, this is a carryover from childhood, and I still have these same types of thoughts, then you know that it's not you, it's just your programming. So now, hopefully, if you're at that stage, you're recognizing that, well, if it's just my programming, maybe I can change it. Because the important thing to remember is that if you've experienced abandonment in the past, you're not out of your mind if you're fearing abandonment today. And if you feel when people don't invite you to a party, or when you feel you've been rejected, or when you've been fired, or things just aren't going your way, it's important to remember that there's this carryover from childhood that might be exaggerating everything that you're feeling today. That's really important. Why is that important? Because if you can acknowledge that, then you can recognize that you have a lot more control over this, or a little bit more control over this, than you may have ever imagined. So it's important, number one, is to recognize that if you feel like the world has turned against you, you're in survival. When your brain feels like you are in survival, then your body responds with chemicals that mirror survival. So if you feel panic, if you feel like you need to run, if you feel alone, if you feel terrified, if you develop behaviors that are congruent with feeling terrified, that's all par for the course. That's actually normal considering what you're experiencing. The brain can't tell the difference between saber-toothed tiger of 100,000 years ago that we need to really run from, and a fearful thought like, oh my God, I'm all alone, I'm not being invited to that situation, or my family has rejected me and I feel so alone. When I was going through my divorce, I had to face disappointing my parents, which sounds so bizarre because I was in my mid-30s and I had children and I had a house and a business, but I was terrified of losing their approval. And at the time, I was just becoming slightly aware that this had a lot more to do with my childhood stuff than my adult stuff. And it was amazing to figure out that, wow, there was a lot more to what was going on to this situation than I realized. It was a game changer for me when I realized, like, what's happening here? Like, I'm worried about getting divorced and I'm terrified that my mother is going to reject me. I was a grown woman and I had these fears. So when I began to realize, like, okay, I felt like the world had turned against me. My family moved to another state. My brother was taking the side of my ex-husband. My children were all confused. It was a terrible time. But as I began to peel myself through the experience and I raised my level of awareness, remember, we can live below the veil or above the veil, and most of us live below the veil of consciousness unknowingly because we're not taught about patterns. We're not taught about living below the veil versus living above the veil. We're not taught that the brain can very easily be triggered. And the more trauma that we have in our past, the more we stay stuck and frozen and reactive to our emotions, rather than gaining control, self-regulating, and being able to think our way out of this situation. So we're trying to gain control over our emotions so we can stay out of survival and we can self-regulate. Why? So that we don't have to feel this way anymore. So I wanted to give you some steps that you can use. I wrote them down. So there are 5 steps. I think 5 steps would be easier for people to remember. So number 1 is remember why this is so triggering. Why do I feel so terrified by this idea that people have turned against me? Because it's tied to survival. Human beings need to feel, they're actually programmed. Consider like an app on your phone. We come pre-programmed to seek connections with other people. And so why? Because if I'm born and my tribe rejects me, I'm not going to survive outside the tribe. Think about the early people. Really, really needed each other. Think about animals, think about disease, think about other tribes. So this idea is coded into us for us to seek connections with other people. When we experience the abandonment of other people, our primitive survival mechanism is triggered. We're just not advanced enough yet as human beings to be able to, in an instant, recognize this. So we're still responding to it below the veil of consciousness. And we're learning, thank goodness, we're learning to understand that when I think something, or actually when I feel something, then I think something, and then my brain goes into rationalizing what I think and what I feel. So if I feel abandoned, my brain actually agrees with me, or my mind actually agrees with me. It doesn't help me feel any better. In fact, it helps me feel worse. But this is a below the veil process. It's rationalization. So I feel something, my mind has to rationalize it. And so that's why you can be upset with someone can send you a text message and you can read that text and see something that was not there. And then after you calm down, you go back and you read the text and you're like, oh my, I'm so glad I didn't respond to that one because that did not say what I thought it said when I was angry, right? So we really have to be aware of how our mind plays tricks on us to rationalize how we feel. So number one is to recognize that feeling like the world has turned against you is a primitive, natural feeling when you feel abandoned. Okay, so hopefully that breathes a little bit of fresh air into your experience, like maybe there is hope. Number two, okay, so the other thought that saved me was there is an answer to every problem that I have. I might not know what the answer is. The answer might escape me. I might not even have the tools yet to solve this problem, but there is a solution to every problem that you face. Again, there is a solution to every problem you face. It might not be the solution you want, which as human beings with a personality and an ego, we often buck up against, right? The solution might be, I need to go no contact with my uncle who is an alcoholic, who continues to steal from me and is upsetting my children, and no matter how often I try to help him out, he ends up taking the money, gambling it away, drinking it away. He's getting into trouble. He crashed my car. He's coming, he's meeting my kids after school. He's asking them for money. Your solution might be, if he just stops drinking, then I could live a happy life. I don't have to worry about him becoming homeless. That is not the solution that is going to solve this problem for you, because it's not a solution you can control, right? It's not an answer you can control. So when your uncle turns against you and he turns your family against you, and he goes on social media and says that my niece is such a selfish person and she's turned people against me, and people don't believe you, it can feel like the world has turned against you, right? There is a solution to that problem, but it might not be the solution that you want. But trust me when I tell you, or you'll figure it out. You don't have to trust me. Just do it on your own and you'll figure it out. There is a solution to every problem you have. I don't care if it's addiction. I don't care if it's codependency. I don't care if it's an eating disorder. Whatever it is, there is a solution to the problem you have. But it's sort of like if you needed a jackhammer to break up concrete, but all you had in your shed was a chisel and a hammer, you have a big problem. And you're overwhelmed because what you need is a jackhammer. The problem is you don't have the jackhammer, but the jackhammer exists. We just have to help people learn to look for the right tools to help them out of the problem that they're having. But there is a solution to every problem that we have. Number three, it's important that we learn to think about the way that we think, right? So we can get upset and get caught up thinking believing and having belief systems that are dysfunctional. And again, we need to teach our children, we need to teach one another, our spouses, whoever, communities of people, to check your belief system, because a belief system is a program. And so if you, for instance, think below the veil of consciousness, everyone has to like you, you're going to have a lot of problems in life. If you think that you're never supposed to fail, you're going to have a lot of problems in life. If you think that everyone's supposed to think that you're the best at whatever you do, you're going to have a lot of problems in life. If you think you're never supposed to be sad, if you think you're never supposed to be angry, if you think that you're never supposed to be fired, if you think that you're never supposed to be someone who has to deal with a tornado or a hurricane or tremendous life change, a death or whatever, you're going to have problems, because those beliefs tie you to situations and circumstances in the 3D that you might not be able to control. And so what do we have to learn to do? We have to learn to roll with what shows up. Whatever it is, we have to learn to roll with what shows up. That doesn't mean that we don't address what's showing up. It just means that we have to, A, confront the beliefs that are keeping us stuck so we don't have as many problems as we used to. And that's what I find so exciting about learning about self-love and codependency and even narcissistic abuse, because it is the belief that will keep you stuck which perpetuate many of the problems, that cause you to feel like the world is turned against you. So when you trace it back, you gain awareness, you slow things down, you begin to self-regulate with things like meditation and journaling, support groups, CPTSD therapy, whatever works for you. I offer books, meditations, and online programs myself. But whatever avenue of support that you seek, when you begin to understand at the core there was a belief that was keeping you stuck, then you have less problems. For instance, if you believe that everyone has to like you, and you meet someone who just doesn't like you, maybe you remind them of their mother, maybe you remind them of their sister, maybe you remind them of their uncle, whatever, they don't like you. If you find that to be so upsetting that you can't stop thinking about it, you have a problem. And if this person that dislikes you, you ruminate about to the point where you're now worrying about what this person might be saying about you at work or on social media, you have many more problems. If you are not invited to a party that this person holds, you could feel like the whole world has turned against you because you haven't been included. Now, if you take just this one situation and you trace it back to this idea, probably that originated in childhood, that you were not enough, probably because you weren't treated as if you were, probably because before the age of 3, you believed that the world was unsafe, and you assumed that it was unsafe because you were not good enough to get your needs met, which is a false belief, but it's a belief anyway, and beliefs become patterns and programs. And they begin to stream into the consciousness, into the 3D. And what's returned to us is matter that mirrors what we believe, all below the veil of consciousness, all through the default mode network of the brain, right? And so when we take the time to ask ourselves, that's why I love to do journaling prompts. And if anyone's interested, you could actually go to my website and go to, as a matter of fact, I have it behind me. We're now offering a 60-page workbook, boundary building workbook, and it has all sorts of journaling prompts in it. And you also get an MP3 with that as well. And I love doing journaling prompts because it helps me get to the core and the nitty-gritty of why I'm doing what I'm doing. Because if I don't know why I'm doing what I'm doing, I'm going to have the same problems. I'm never going to be able to regulate myself. So knowledge is actually what's giving me the opportunity to self-regulate, so I'm not reactive to what's happening outside of me, and I'm not focusing on things I can't control, and I'm not going down the rabbit hole of this 3D world. Think of a narcissist who believes that they're a victim. They're victimizing you all over social media. They're trying to tear your business apart all over Google. They're trying to hurt you and harass you on Facebook and Instagram. They're trying to turn your family against you. They're making up stories. They're distorting the truth. They're projecting all of their wounds onto you as if you were the one who did everything to them since the day they were born. But in their head, they're the victim. Now, if you stay locked inside that dynamic with someone who cannot hear you, then you become part of their 3D reality and you will be drained. And that's a serious problem if you think that this person has to like you, or if you think this person has to change, or if you think this person has to agree with you, you have a problem. And the problem might on the surface look like, oh, it's this person. But what if you could liberate yourself from the belief that has you believing that this person has to change? It is the belief that's keeping you stuck. I can tell you in my own life, when I was going through my divorce and I squared off with this belief right in the face of it. It was like I was looking into the mouth of a fire-breathing dragon. And I said, I no longer need your validation. I will no longer seek your validation. I will seek alignment within myself. I will honor myself. I will trust my need to divorce. I will trust my need to make a better pathway for my children, regardless of how you feel. Suddenly, I was crushing the old paradigm, and I was doing something so different. It felt almost supernatural, right? What felt natural was to recoil and go into fear. I said, I'm not doing that. I'm overcoming the fear. When it felt like I should be punishing my ex-husband just like he was trying to punish me, and I let him go. I was doing something that was so unnatural because what I wanted to do was react and push him back. even punish him back for trying to hurt me and my kids. But I began to understand, if I want something different, if I want out of this paradigm, I have to be the different one. I have to regulate how I feel. I have to imagine the reality that I want to create. I don't want to feel like the world is out to get me. I don't want to feel like the world is against me. I have to shift. So like I said, these are the steps that I took to help me understand where my power was. So I'm hoping that it helps you. The next thing that you want to ask yourself is, how are you keeping this situation alive, right? So what I try to help my clients understand is that when you are paying attention to something that is hurtful, it's almost like you're giving it oxygen, right? Every fire needs oxygen to continue to burn. And the more oxygen you give a flame, the more intense the flame. And so attention is that oxygen. And so when I'm looking into the eyes of people who have rejected me, when I'm looking into the experience of the eyes or the actual circumstance where I feel rejected, when I'm looking at that and I'm feeling the energy of that, then I'm actually giving that oxygen. That fire and that intensity is going to burn and burn and burn. It's going to get brighter and brighter and brighter. And it's really, I'm asking you to do something that's not natural. It is natural for the brain, the unconscious brain and the subconscious mind, to react fiercely when people wound you, and to recoil sometimes, and to live in a state of reactivity. I think that's normal considering feeling so rejected, but it's not going to help us feel better until we learn how to regulate our perception, until we learn how to regulate our emotions, until we learn how to think in a different way. And so there's so much power in recognizing, wait a minute, what am I doing wrong? You guys have probably heard me tell you the story of when I started to go shutty shutty. And shutty shutty is the phrase that I used when the first time I shut the phone on my ex-husband. Back in the day, I had a flip phone, and we were in the middle of separation, and it was really a crazy time. It always is, but before you build something amazing, oftentimes whatever you had has to crumble. And so my marriage was crumbling, and it was not pretty, and it was very, very painful. And it was a complete shift of mind. You know, you have this married mind, and then all of a sudden you're having a separated mind, a divorced mind, a single mind. It's a lot. There's so many transformations going on. But I started to understand, like, if I want something new, like if I wanted to build a new house, I'd have to knock down the house that was there. And that would be a painful, grueling process. And there would be loss there. And there'd be a lot of letting go there. There'd be a lot of sweat there. Okay. So I began to understand that in order for me to create a new life with my children, I had to go through the process of this old life crumbling. And it was painful. And then I began to understand that as long as I went back at him, and as long as I responded to him, I was breathing oxygen into this situation. And I didn't want to do that anymore because I wanted a new paradigm. I didn't want to continue to feel like I had the weight of the world on my shoulders. But so I had to check myself and say, well, how am I contributing to this? How am I giving this credence, right? And again, part of my ability to recognize what I was doing wrong was recognizing my dependency on him. I had a financial dependency upon him that I had to eradicate. I had to get 3 jobs. I worked 3 jobs 7 days a week for a while. And I was grateful that I was making an honest living and that I was putting sneakers on my kids' feet. And I was able to keep them in school and get my daughter her braces or her glasses, whatever they needed. Sure, it was hard, but I was developing resiliency, and I was shattering the old paradigm of dependency and fear, being dependent on someone. One of the worst things that we can do to one another is create dependencies upon one another, right? Because then I'm not free. I'm not free to make my own decisions, and every decision I make is going to be rooted in fear and survival. And so when I'm making decisions out of survival, it's default. It's not consciousness. It's not my heart making that decision or my spirit making that decision. It's a paradigm making that decision. So we really have to make sure that we're not creating dependencies on one another, and we're teaching our children how to be resilient and reliant. But that starts with allowing them to attach to us properly in the beginning. So when, my father and my mother were the type of people, oh, don't let them need us. Well, it made us very insecure people, which made us needy people, because we were never, during that time when we were young, up until the age of 7, we weren't allowed to need. We weren't allowed to want. In their head, they were ignorant, just saying it is what it is. There was no Dr. Phil or Oprah or Dr. Oz back then, right? They thought, oh, we want strong kids, we'll just throw them in the pool and hopefully they'll learn how to swim. Or if we want them to stop crying, we'll just ignore them at a day old. Like if they're crying, we'll just tell them to stop crying, or we'll tell them that we'll give them something to cry about. It was so backwards, because had they coddled us in the beginning and nurtured us in the beginning and allowed us to secure a healthy attachment to them, then we would have known that we were enough. And that's where we would have developed our resiliency from. And none of us would have developed, or possibly would have avoided, becoming so codependent, so insecure, so lacking of boundaries. And all of us finding ourselves in one-way relationships where we're seeking connections to the other people that we love and never really feeling like we're able to achieve those connections. And so we want to ask ourselves, like, how am I perpetuating this situation? So how am I offering this fire, attention? And so yes, us calling our friends about our friend who abandoned us, and us, drinking ourselves into an oblivion because we didn't get invited, or us continuing to scour social media to see where our girlfriend is or see where our boyfriend is. We're actually breathing life back into the paradigm that we're trying to escape from. The last thing that I want you to ask yourself is, what can I do to change this? What can I do to reaffirm myself? How can I stop abandoning myself, right? How can I take this amazing time, the separation from others, and begin to honor my inner child? How can I take this time to learn about myself and to honor myself? Because I have a theory. I think that we come from the same place, right? If you think about every star in the universe, every person born, every ocean, every droplet of water on planet Earth, we all came from the same place. And science will tell us that there was a Big Bang. Me personally, if there's something that creates, nothing comes from nothing. So there had to be something before the Big Bang. Okay, fine. Maybe we all, this universe came from a black hole of another universe, whatever it is, and we all came from the same place, which to me is really, really exciting. So here we are, we're matter on planet Earth, but we came from a place of oneness. And then we incarnate, or our soul is beckoned into our mother's uterus through the sperm and the egg. And this becomes a doorway, an amazing merging of two cells that become one cell that rapidly divide. So here we come from oneness, we experience separation, then become one being, and in our mother's uterus, we're rapidly dividing. We become one in this experience, this uterine experience, and then pain comes, destruction comes, that labor pain comes, and it feels destructive and it feels violent. The placenta pulls away, and we are birthed through this birth canal. And it's a painful experience. Some babies are born black and blue, and hello, as the mother of 3, I can attest to the fact that this is a very painful experience. So we have this uterine experience where things are all beautiful, and all of a sudden this pain comes, and this baby is born from us, and the baby experiences separation. The baby is now separate from us. The cord is cut, more separation. And then what's supposed to happen is a period of connection, a period of oneness again. And if we are allowed to experience that oneness, then we have oneness within. Much more oneness than separation than for or of someone who's experienced disconnection from mother and other and father and family and feels rejected and abandoned, right? Because that reconnection didn't happen. And so we walk around on planet Earth feeling separate from the self, this self-alienation. We don't know who we are, right? Our skin is raw. But what are we doing? Below the veil of consciousness, we're still trying to connect. But we're trying to connect from a place of lack and I am not enoughness that was created in childhood. So we're looking, we come from one place, we have this force of oneness, and then we have a force of separation, and we're always going through this state of constriction and expansion, right? So here in this separation from others, in this period of our life where we feel so disconnected, like the world is turned against us, is an opportunity, if we seize it, to reconnect with the self in a spiritual way, in a holy way. In spite of what's happened around us, we have an opportunity to connect to the real self. And how do we do that? Well, self-care. And exactly all of these 5 steps that I've actually outlined for you, asking yourself these tough questions, tuning into the self, understanding that there's an answer to every problem that we have, recognizing that our belief systems that are below the veil of consciousness might have us selling ourselves short, might have us feeling insecure, might have us attracting narcissists into our life, might have us believing that we are the doormats in life, might have us believing, nah, I'll never win the lottery, so I'll never play. What? Might have us believing that, I'm overweight, I really don't deserve a healthy relationship. What? This is a belief system that is creating your reality. And so the solution is not the relationship. The solution is fixing the belief system so that you feel worthy just because you are. The real solution is to learn to self-regulate so well that you change the field within you, that you change the energy within you, that you go from a constricted heart space to an open heart space, to self. And that regardless of what's happening in the 3D world, you refuse to abandon yourself. You refuse to not push yourself. You refuse to not love yourself. You refuse to criticize yourself. You refuse to judge yourself. You're learning to say namaste to everything that's happening outside of you and namaste to the love that is inside of you as well. This is the way we get to change the world. When you change on the inside, you change the world on the outside. So as hokey pokey and as hippy dippy as it sounds, if you want something to change, stop waiting for other people to change and focus completely on yourself. Hey, if you love this content, don't forget to check out the next video, and you can go to my website and take the codependency quiz.